This is not about the thoughts, words, concepts, knowledge, because all of that is artificial. This is really about the primary essence of what really is, of what you really are, which is natural. And so, really, the words are just a signal pointing to something or speaking around something, but it can never speak what it is. The words, the concepts, thoughts can never give you what it is. But there's something in between those words, before the words, beyond the concepts, that is not knowledge, that is that true intelligence. It's in that quietness, the silence, a kind of stillness. In the actual sense of that, then you encounter what really is. And when you encounter what really is, what can often happen is you're faced with what sometimes people call the void. No one knows what the void is. Even the word void itself is void of meaning, apart from the meaning that the artificial self applies onto it. And that's what it means when it says void, because it can't know what this mystery is, but it says, oh, it's a void. And so it's often afraid of this void, but it's really not afraid of the void. It's afraid of what it thinks the void is and what it thinks that means. There's no fear if you are in the mystery, if you are the mystery. The fear is in thinking you are something that knows something. And so it has this idea of void and what that means. When really, void is just pointing to an absence of all of that artificial thought, the artificial self. And that's what it's afraid of. The artificial self is afraid of the loss of itself because that's its whole identity. And to be without that is a kind of death, the ultimate kind of death, a complete annihilation. So it fears being swallowed up by this thing that it calls the void, which is just the absence of itself. So one of the blockages that can happen is that when someone is faced with the mystery or this void, when it creates this mental projection of what that is and what it means, fear arises and it will often try to avoid the void, try to escape. Or what it does is it creates some kind of new identity as a way to try to hold on to the artificial self. And so that can come in the form of the identity of being a monk, Buddhist monk, being a Christian, being a yogi, a meditator, a light worker, or a chosen one, or the identity of enlightenment itself. Anything, just anything it can to identify with something, because in identification, which is always limited, the artificial self seems to remain in place. And of course, in that illusion of the artificial self, it feels like it's in control. So it's always scrambling for some kind of identity. to hold on to, because it doesn't want to get dissolved in the mystery or in what it thinks of as the void. But if a being really wants to be free, they have to get comfortable with the void, which is really to say they have to be comfortable with the absence of the false, the illusion, the dream, the artificial self. The moment you identify with something, which is always something limited, your experience becomes limited. But when you are not identified with anything, that is freedom. And so we can see this at work in society as well. The same kind of thing, of course, happens in traditional society, where the artificial self will try to identify with a certain position. It'll say, I'm a Christian, and so I'm against the other religions because my religion is the correct one. My God is the correct one. My morals or philosophy is the correct one. So the moment you identify with something, you're always in opposition to something else. So you've created a separation. And of course, in separation, that is the illusion. In separation, there is no wholeness. There is no oneness. So you lose touch with what you really are. It will say, I am left and those are right. Political left and right. So there's all these different divisions, so many divisions. The moment you identify with a division, you become limited. Then you create the illusion of a separation. Then there is conflict within, because now you've divided yourself. And then there is conflict with others. And this is what we call modern normal society. To have these false identities, which society encourages and often imposes. The moment you are born, you're given all these identities. First starts with a name, then with the body, then with certain personality traits or characteristics, certain ethnicity, certain religion, political ideology, your favorite football team, all these kind of tribal, primitive divisions. And that's not to say that these can't be, they're not, that it's not useful terms, right? We have to function in society. But is it possible to function without identifying who you are, self-identity, with those things? Can you play a certain role without identifying with the role? Can you have a certain opinion without getting identified with that opinion? It's possible. And it's really the only way to be truly free, to remain free. Everything else is to remain in the illusion of the artificial self. And if one is in the artificial self, then they are not natural. They're not in that natural freedom, that natural presence. So the challenge is to face this mystery of what you are, of what really is, what some call the void, to face that void without trying to avoid the void, without fearing the void, without running to some new identity as quickly as you can to fill that void. And so it will often take some courage. But deeper than the courage, it is the wisdom of knowing that you cannot know, that you don't know. If you really don't know, then there's no fear. Fear is when you think you know. Fear is your projection of what you think the void is or the mystery is, and what you think it might mean. Maybe there is the fear of, oh, I'll become a vegetable. I'll not be able to function. Who will I be without my identity? How will I function in the world? But that's coming from a place of the artificial self thinking that it knows what it is and what could happen, which is future. If you're truly unknowing, if you've got the wisdom of recognizing that you cannot know, that all you can understand is that you can't understand intellectually, then there is an openness to the mystery. And in the openness to the mystery, you are the mystery. And there's a familiarity with that. There's a comfort with that because really it's your true home.